Has the market changed its mind about what the Fed may do next?
We have got to get inflation behind us. I wish there were a painless way to do that. There isn't.
Think of that number, and maybe more importantly, what do you think the Fed's going to do, and therefore what their equity is going to do?
I've been saying over and over again to my colleagues here that he wants your portfolio down so that you won't be able to spend as much.
Hello, I'm Christopher the 2nd, 2022. And we see here in the Swedish press, most of the discussion, or starting off the morning, was a tweet from the SverigeDemokraterna talking about nuclear and the clearance for the nuclear on Ringhal 1 and 2, which is run by Vattenfall. And this means that Sweden is going to be getting back into the nuclear game. There is the criticism that this will take 15 years. We had the comments from the CEO last week saying nothing could get restarted until 2030. In the tweet that you see from the SverigeDemokraterna, you do see that they say we can restart. And if it'll take that long, we'll see. But they did commit to the survey in July, talking about SMRs. So if it goes SMR, which would have a shorter time to build and time to market of around 6 years, as opposed to 2030, we'll see if it's going to take 8 or 7 or 6. But in any case, it looks like Sweden's going to be getting back into the nuclear game, and that's on the 400 billion Swedish kroner tax incentive that was outlined in the Tidöavtalet. Now, our energy industry would still leave over to Nord Pool, which is a company operating out of England and majority owned by Euronext, and handles the energy trading market of something like 23 different countries, and I think 50 something are buying from it. So there's no signs yet on an improvement in the grid or the grid infrastructure. There's just an offering of a different pricing model that I've seen. So we'll see what happens. And but Sweden is very clear moving into a nuclear build scenario. Denmark has come up with some issues, saying it's maybe too close to Denmark and wouldn't be a good solution. But then again, I think we're going to probably move ahead with SMR in that consideration. We do see also a little bit of political shade coming, and that's on the SverigeDemokraterna primarily. There were parades or protests, whatever they want to call them, in Norway this weekend. And people were saying there were SverigeDemokraterna party leaders at these events, which were white supremacists. And SverigeDemokraterna's answer to it was, we don't have any SverigeDemokraterna in Norway, we're Swedish. So, you know, we'll see what happens there. But there are photos and there are videos, and it's somewhat disturbing, to say the least. And yet you still also have no announcement from SverigeDemokraterna about this woman who was a party leader and a teacher before she was in the government, and distancing themselves from her. And this goes back on the statement from the SverigeDemokraterna saying they had no Nazis or active members in white supremacist organizations that were top leaders within the SverigeDemokraterna. So they have a lot to work on, and not much being said there. On top of that, we do see the Swedish television doing what they call an uppdragsgranskning, or an investigative series into social democrats, and they've also published as well a Swedish Democrat, the Swedish Democrat or SverigeDemokrat, who lives in Stockholm. He has an apartment in Stockholm and has recently decided that he will do his work from his Norrtälje, which is north of Stockholm. And that requires that he take a 2,000 crown cab bill each time he transports himself between town and Norrtälje. But he has to do this, and it has to be 14,000, and it's legal, and it's included in the Riksdag agreement. So, and then you have this other woman who's taken close to 500,000 crowns in her fees from last year. And then you have a social democrat, which was the former ruling party in the Parliment. He is renting out a house that he lists as his official residence, and it's a kind of a summer cottage to a German resident in the episode. And he lives in a different commune where he's not represented and he's not being taxed. And his defense for this is that he has friends who live in Stockholm who are doing this. So there's probably more Social Democrats doing this as well. But I think really what you have to look at is that it means that there are more politicians that are doing things that the average citizen would not do. And this is the global problem of political parties that are being selected. You're not really getting the best candidate, and you're paying a lot of money because the average Swedish politician in the Riksdag is making something like 1.8 million Swedish per annum. And so that's a good amount of money that translates down to over 150,000 per month that they're receiving. And we saw the gentleman from the Moderaterna party who tried to hike his pay rate more than 2 times the inflation rate in Sweden, and is going against a labor union implementing a wage salary increase of 4.4%. So we have a global problem, and we're affected by it in Sweden as well. But what we see as well is the Swedish press is focused more on the external rather than the internal. We had another shooting last night, and this was a key component to the agreement and to the campaign of the current ruling party to improve Swedish society. Instead, we want to look at rate hikes. We want to look at North Korean missile launches. We want to look at the political ruling party of Greenland and how it's gone red, and what's happening there, as well as the horror of the wars and atrocities that are being committed in Ukraine. And we see no closer move to the peace talks. However, our Swedish Prime Minister did extend congratulations to Lula of Brazil to say we look forward to working together. And remember, Lula he's been a brick, and he's also now, question is, will he be a NATO sailor? And he has a very strong relationship with Putin. He's condemned the war on both sides, blaming both Zelensky and Putin. And but at the same time, he's been active with Western goals, where he sent troops to Haiti. So we'll have to see what happens going forward with somebody like Lula. And again, you have the same issue of politics, where Lula had been convicted on corruption due to a car wash, but then it was further investigated that the car wash corruption was really maybe on the Bolsonaro side. And so Lula was freed from prison as a result of that investigation and revelation, and why he was now able to run against Bolsonaro and win. Although Bolsonaro has yet to concede, we keep a current watch there and see how that will develop. But remember, Lula has been a brick, and BRIC, of course, stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So you have this question looming there. But the rate hike in the U.S., many are hoping for 50 bips as opposed to 75 or even 1. And the question there is, if you believe the White House economist, and you believe these group of economists, well, let's just stick with the White House. Joe Biden keeps saying how the economy is doing well. He said it's kicking butt. And then you have the employment figures. You see wage hikes coming. You see a amount of jobs open and unfilled. And you see something like a 15% quitting ratio. So you could argue that the economy is strong. But if it's so strong, then the economy won't miss 75 basis points and won't miss a 1 basis point move, or a spot 75 basis point move on the interest rates. If the economy is weak and can't afford the cooling, then you'd only want to go with 50 basis points. So the question is, which way is the economy going? What does the Fed do tonight? What is their announcement on the rates? And so we see that continuing. And instead of, again, focusing on the Swedish society and how we can improve our own politicians and how we could get better politicians in place, we look abroad and with the fears. And remember, if the House goes to the Republicans, which is a strong likelihood, then they have the powers of impeachment. What they would require or need to actually impeach and convict the president on the impeachment would be a Senate controlled by Republicans. And if the Senate would convict, then they would throw out the president, right? They would convict him. And then the Speaker of the House would fill the role. And then you have the question of who would be the Speaker. And you can make your own guesses if it'll be Kevin McCarthy or someone else, if they would be able to install him. And then, so on top of that, on the business side, we see a very interesting development where, of course, the real estate is again under pressure because of the rate hikes and how that's going to go going forward. But one of the things that we saw, and we saw this reflected in the US GDP figures, was the defense industry doing relatively well. Now, Saab, which is one of our defense companies, and last week in the press, the company that's manufacturing troop transports or tread track transports is saying that they won't be able to keep up with the order demand if Sweden goes up to the 2% required by NATO. And under that and the continued support for Ukraine, they won't be able to meet their order backlog. BAE Systems is also seeing that they're going to possibly reinvest in former technologies that were no longer needed. And then you have the discussions about Iranian drones and what's going on there, and the amount of the arms going from the United States to the Ukraine and what's making it to the front lines. So the United States is now sending over military to help in the training and actually track where the weapons are going, to address the questions where you could read by the Finnish prime minister or president in her note about the weapons trade and what's being seen in Western Europe as a result. And so do we go to an ESG where ESG can't buy missile technology, can't buy nuclear missile protection? All of these things were eliminated. So Boeing could never be a ESG company. Northrop Grumman could never be an ESG industry. And even despite their going along with the US ESG standards, they would never be considered ESG because they're war machines. But if the Ukraine war is now an existential war for democracy, perhaps we'll get an ESG plus, where you could see Saab getting investments from ESG supported funds. It's just a question. And nobody is coming up with this question yet, nor is anybody changing anything, but it could be something that we would see. You could always just turn yourself to the VICE indexes and invest in those if you want to get those performances, which outpace the market performance and have done relatively well. But that would be a question for somebody else. And then, of course, within our own industries, we see that the intermittent wind power company Vestas Vind did not have enough wind in the sales to actually meet the earnings expectations, nor do they forecast very good future expectations. They blame this on political uncertainty and the cost of inflation. So inflation is factoring in more and more on the earnings, even in these sunny side industries like wind and solar. They should be able to do well, but they're not doing as well. Chip technologies are highlighted as an area in the Swedish press talking about this. And this, of course, plays back to Taiwan. We had our warning from the Chinese minister yesterday telling Sweden we have to be careful about what we're doing with Taiwan and how that's played out. So there is a company called Sea Worldwide, which has written a paper on the rise of big government, addressing how this issue affects us. This is an idea that Nassim Taleb has also talked about in the past, about the growth of the GDP based on your government and how much of your government is now part of your GDP. And so take a look at that. But also another troubling development for the Swedish economy is the death of the craftsman. There are no comments yet on how the tax will go through for bicycle repair shops or shoemaker repair shops or other craftsman related issues, because with the increase in the MOMS or the VAT tax, you would see a lot of these businesses going out of business, is what they are saying. So if you don't have an underlying core that can repair, you can only go to the super chains to buy new products, or you can become efficient at your own home and doing it yourself. So we have a lot to kind of worry about, and we had the announcement from the Swedish economy minister yesterday talking about how grave a state of the Swedish economy was, but these underlying pins to our economy within the small business side are not being addressed, or at least not being addressed effectively in a way that would help them continue to stay afloat. So we have a lot of issues, but we're looking abroad. And we're looking at other issues to focus on, rather than focus on what we could do to strengthen the Swedish economy. And that was part of our current coalition government's campaign. So we'll see what happens, and we'll keep you posted and available to what the trends are that we see. So wish you a great day in investing, and have a good one. Thank you. Bye.